If there's anybody popping on the event page,
All
Google
right,
Plus.
we're live.
All right.
Hello, world.
Hi, world. Hi, everybody. Okay, so no messages on the Google Plus page. That's good. We have a few viewers. That's nice. Amanda is viewing. I don't know if she's going to participate, but she's welcome to. Cool. I hear an interesting crinkling noise. I don't know, Marco, do you hear that?
Yes, I do.
Don't know where it's
That
coming
may
from.
have been through my speaker. I mean, through my headphones, possibly.
All right, let's see. If you go on mute, let's see what happens.
Let's see. Now, how do I go on mute here?
That would be if you see the video
Oh, I
box.
see. Yes.
Top,
Yeah. The microphone, and then just oops, a daisy.
Yep. You can just click it and then unclick it. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, just whenever you want to speak, just unmute yourself, and then we're all going to be doing that anyway.
And I hear
Okay.
Andrew too, so I think Andrew should get on.
Hey, Andrew. Good to have you back on, and glad things are working. All right, so Marco, what do you think? Should we just kind of jump into this?
I think we should just jump in. Everybody who's on the line is connected. We can hear them, and I posted the link on our event page for anybody who wants to join in. We have 6 on right now, which means there are 4 more spots. And hopefully this is going to go a little more smoothly on the technical end. But I'm really looking forward to talking about this. We already kind of started before the broadcast.
We kind of started kicking out a little bit and talking about everything.
And then suddenly it was at the top of the hour. And
so yeah, welcome everybody. I guess this is our week 3, first hangout for week 3, if I'm getting the timing correct. I'm just so immersed in the book. It's like, but yeah, we're going over the mental structure today, or at least we're going to try to have like a little container to discuss the section of the book from page, where does it start? 73 to about 101 or so. And I guess just to launch into it, I'm just going to throw a couple of things that I found really interesting, and then we can just start and just chime in with whatever you found to be intriguing from the readings. But
hey, Jeremy, before we go on,
yeah,
everybody here has been on a call before and therefore has had a chance to introduce themselves, except for Greg, I believe.
Oh, yeah, maybe we should just introduce Greg.
Not to single you out, but
if you want to say something,
Sure.
Greg, yeah, please do. Tell us a little bit about what brought you here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Well, I purchased The Ever-Present Origin some months ago, even before I knew this was happening, with the intention of really going through it because I heard about it and through the Gebser conferences, and I've actually looked at some videos, but even before that, through Ken Wilber's work and also William Irwin Thompson's work, and also Steve McIntosh. And so I said, wow, okay, this is obviously a key book in the canon, and I thought this was a perfect opportunity to go through it and be able to share the experience, both in terms of sharing any ideas I may have and getting clarification from those of you who've already gone through it and have some more expertise.
Very cool. Good. Always good to learn of another Thompson reader. But we've corresponded a little bit before, so I knew that about you.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay, great. Thanks, Greg.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of this week's reading, oh goodness, where to begin? I'm just gonna geek out because it's probably the easiest way to kind of just start. But I found it really interesting talking about the emergence of this mental structure consciousness. Gebser connected it to the emergence of monotheism, and you would maybe superficially associate that with the mythical, since it's sort of about religion and religio, and but yeah, just the birth of the monotheistic deity as kind of representative of the human ego, the self. So and the shift from this kind of nighttime, dreamtime consciousness to this daylight consciousness and these solar deities. So that this can go way back. This can go way before Greece, way before Just go to ancient Egyptian civilization, and I wish Natalie was actually present because she knows about this one pharaoh who developed basically monotheism and the solar shift. So I thought that was really interesting, and it quickly was stamped out. By the way, after his death, they kind of reversed everything and stopped it. So it's kind of interesting to kind of study contemporary archaeology and history and kind of find more evidence of this solar shift into monotheism, into deities. But it was also really interesting what Gebser said about the emergence of Athena jumping out of Zeus's forehead, right, as this kind of mental birth. And then even his description of like the language with menace and this kind of angry, wrathful, focused direction out of the head. It just reminds me of almost like a migraine. The birth of the mental structure is this kind of like piercing thought and directedness. But even this is really interesting because this is all myth. These are all mythological images to describe the emergence of the mental, and it just brought to mind, just as a kind of supplementary reading, maybe a follow-up reading to this, if you're curious about particularly the emergence of the contemporary consciousness. William Irwin Thompson's writings in Coming into Being and the Time Falling Bodies Take to Light, he has a few interesting chapters about ancient Sumer and sort of the evolution of myth in the pre-Grecian world that was already showing evidence of this kind of emergence of coming to awareness of the self, of man, of mortality, of individuality, kind of pitted against the gods and against the mythic dream time. It's really interesting to kind of see the emergence of myth as it becomes a little bit more existential, a little bit more depressing, or more focused on our mortality. But if you think about it, there's a kind of interesting development with the alienation of the human being from nature, and I think that has a big part to play in this. Thompson has another good essay, and I think John David Ebert comments on this as well. But basically, the evolution of the afterlife is an interesting way to study the emergence of this mental structure, the emergence of pushing ourselves away from death. Like, for instance, in Catalhuyuk, families were buried in underneath their bedrooms. Like the structures of the houses were built in such a way so that there's almost kind of like a familial catacomb or tomb underneath where people slept at night. And we've gone so far from that now where our graveyards are so far away, but you can kind of see the kind of pushing away of the dead and the keeping away of the dead to focus more on the living, more on the daylight, more on the solar consciousness throughout many different civilizations. But as things complexify and as civilization moves to this sort of daylight mental focus through the emergence of the alphabet and scripts, McLuhan's another good guy to talk about this sort of mental structure emergence. The moving from like the Greek alphabet, reading from left to right, is another interesting thing. But I'm gonna stop rambling now. But these are all kind of like seed thoughts for me. Like, wow, this is really interesting. It connected so many dots with not only with myth, but with what we know about history and the sort of pushing away of the dead, pushing away of the dream time. And then, of course, the interesting forehead thing. I thought that was kind of curious and connected back to the Zeus myth too, right? The parting of the forehead and then Athena popping out of the forehead. Interesting stuff. But if anybody found any of this stuff cool or found another interesting point at the beginning of this read, feel free to chime in.
Well, one of the points that I take from what you're talking about is just how long it takes for these structures to emerge, and so you have, and how uneven it is within a society, and so you have societies where you have the solar, the sort of solar god is represented by the chief, the chief who becomes a king, becomes an emperor, long time before that starts to filter down, and so they become the head of the myth. They become the head of the mythic society. So we have this interesting mix between the between the the entirely immersed mythical world, which is on its way out, and then these first poppings of that sense of the completeness of the I, the completeness of that solar ego, the self-fulfillingness of it almost, as like being literally on top of the societies. I think that's fascinating. What else did you mention? Oh, Akhenaton, I think is the pharaoh that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
And then this idea of pushing death away, which is an interesting, because what I hadn't picked up, I think the first time I read through Gebser, is how much, but which stuck, which really popped out to me this time is how much he characterizes that very differently, and I would actually question that way of saying it. I think it's just it's a very different conception of what death is. And he, I can't think of where he does it, but when he's talking about, he's talking about it in almost a way of, like there's this danger that we're going to fall back into sleep, this danger that we're going to fall back into death, that sort of the emergence of the ego moves us away from, and Odysseus comes out of the water and he states himself, as being an individual, as being the self. Or in the rites, I think he's talking about the Orphic. I think it's the Orphic mysteries. But there's this differentiation, which is neither really negative or positive. Gebser actually puts it in a way where there's this constant danger of falling back into sleepfulness, and that I think it's just different from how I was hearing you characterize it. So not only it's alienation from nature, but it's also the ability to encompass the self within that solar ego. So those are just a couple of things that came up while you're talking, Jeremy, that I find pretty fascinating.
Thanks, Andrew. That's a really good point about sort of this carefulness around not only the dead, as I was mentioning, but you're saying sort of like this sort of mythic dream time, like this caution around falling back into it. I think is interesting, and a lot of ancient myths have that emergent motif, I guess you would say, or theme, especially the whole epics of like going into the underworld and retrieving something from the underworld, but not getting stuck down there. And that goes way back even to Gilgamesh and Inanna and Dumuzi and those kinds of mythologies. So,
right.
Yeah.
Persephone or getting caught down there. So you have again this transition from the world of the dream, the world of the myth, and then the separation, or the burgeoning separation, the sort of I'm thinking of when cells separate and they're not quite yet two separate cells, but the beginnings of the differentiation between the world of myth and the world of the unperspective world. I think both magic and myth sort of being fused even together, and then the emergence, and then the sort of the culmination of that process in Jesus going into hell, and Jesus being absolutely, obviously absolutely completely untouched by it, the triumph over death.
Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting point. You making that connection. Feel for anybody who wants to just chime in, please do. But I really like that connection, actually. The Jesus as this kind of ultimate triumph over this underworld. It's an interesting kind of point, and maybe that's I don't really know if we can make this claim historically, but in some kind of spiritual sense, or kind of speaking of the structures, maybe that's why Christianity took on so powerfully and so strongly. It was this movement in consciousness at the time that kind of flooded everybody and kind of took hold and possessed people. And it's interesting because it's not quite that break, but it is. It's a kind of spiritualized break from the underworld at a time maybe where we were ready for it. But yeah, anybody else want to kind of chime in with their initial
I just
thoughts?
make a quick point, Jeremy.
Yeah.
I was brought up in the Catholic tradition, and there's two creeds. There's the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. And what's always been interesting to me is in the Apostles' Creed, there's a line that Jesus descended into hell. And that line is not in the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed is the one that's spoken almost every week throughout the liturgical year. Occasionally, there's some times when they do the Apostles' Creed. But what I find interesting is all the homilies I've listened to in my whole life, I've never heard anybody talk about that line, Jesus descended into hell. And I don't know, I think from my personal experience, now that I've read Gebser and look back on it, I think what's happened to the church over the centuries is that it's become more and more mental, more and more of emphasis on the mental structure, and that gave rise to all the dogma, which becomes increasingly more rational. And I don't know. I want to use the word discrete. So that when I was brought up with a very strong sensibility to sin, and the dominant image in the Catechism was if your soul was pure, the milk bottle was white. If you had venial sins, you had black spots like a Dalmatian. And if you were in the state of mortal sin, the milk bottle was all black. And it became a really rational sort of explanation of how to live your life, to avoid sin, avoid venial sin. If you get into mortal sin, you got to go to confession to get the milk bottle back to white. And I'm saying all that because that's the sensibility I grew up with. And when you hear the line, Jesus descended into hell, no, that can't possibly be. Why would Jesus go to hell? Because that's where all the people with mortal sins go. So I think I find it interesting that nobody ever wants to preach on that. And I think my personal opinion is because we're so deeply embedded in the rational interpretation of the religious experience and this whole control with dogma and sin. But, especially since I've read Gebser, I just think that whole thing about Jesus descending into hell, the hell is the word we use now, but, what was it? The Hebrew word would be Hades, or chaos, Greek word would be chaos, or whatever it is. I find that interesting. I don't have anything more to say about that. I just find that really interesting. I guess that's all I need to say.
Great, thank you, Peter.
Well, I like to just say that I grew up as a Protestant, and not only that early experience, but studies in my 20s of studying, Kabbalah and Tree of Life, and some deeper, more mystical traditions. I thought a key distinction was, yes, Jesus signified the return to individuality or the attainment of individuality, but it was through the perspective of one's personal relationship with God, as opposed to having to go through someone else, whether that was a king, a priest, that personal relationship with God, where you as an individual person was paramount. I think is what I learned was the key distinction there. But in the mental structure portion that we're discussing, what I found interesting was not anything about Jesus going to hell, but Jesus walking on water. I thought that was a very find it here. 1 second. Just 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about this. Let's see. This is weird. I mean, you all know what I'm talking about, right? With
Yes.
Trying to find it. I had it marked. Let's see here. Oh, this is weird. Sorry about this, guys. Okay. can't find it. This is weird. But I wanted to read something from that. If you guys have the book there.
He's on 90.
Oh,
in my
yes. Right. Thank you. Right. Christ survives a shipwreck.
Yeah.
Right. However, and is able to walk on water. With this deed, he overcomes the depths of chaos and is entitled to say, not I am Christ, but I am the light of the world. With that declaration, the first wholly self-assured resplendence of mankind breaks forth, a resplendence venturing into state for the first time that it will assume the burden of the world's darkness and suffering. So I think that what you're talking about being hell in other traditions is talking about, chaos, not hell necessarily. But what do you think that the walking on water specifically signifies for Gebser?
It's a great question, Greg. Thanks for bringing this up. For me, I associate the ocean and with sort of this imaginal or mundus imaginalis, right, the collective unconscious. So it's kind of interesting, the image of Christ standing almost kind of like transcending this kind of collective unconscious. The sea, as you mentioned, is also associated with chaos. In many ways, kind of myth, kind of subsuming into this kind of oceanic dreamtime. And I don't know if this is a sort of a dated way to understand that symbology, but that to me speaks as the first kind of meaning of this kind of this image in this text is a kind of supersession of the dreaming consciousness, of the unconscious, of myth, and this kind of engulfing of the world in this solar light through this individual who's triumphed over the collective unconscious and being subsumed in it. It's interesting too because there's another kind of light in Christianity that I would even argue is a kind of, I don't know if Gebser mentions it in this chapter, can't recall, but a kind of diaphanous light, a seeing through the world into this kind of otherworldly light that kind of subsumes both the daylight consciousness and the nighttime consciousness in a kind of iconographic sense of, again, seeing through transparency, which is an interesting aspect too of Christianity, which is arguably integral. We had a great speaker at the Gebser conference last year who talked about Catholicism in light of the integral and specific Catholic theologian that I can't recall offhand at the moment, but yeah, very interesting.
But don't you think it's interesting too?
Well, one of the things of going to Akhenaten or Akhenaten, didn't he make a move to have the sun god be the soul god?
Yeah.
And Ra or Re symbolizes the sun itself. So that seems to me to be at least a precursor to monotheism. I mean, I guess historically they say that was the first instance of monotheism, so it was shown there. And just to stay on Egypt for 1 second, I find it very interesting that, he talks about Pythagoras and the significance of Pythagoras, but, Pythagoras spent, I think, 12 to 18 years in Egypt studying in the mystery schools and that type of thing. So while it may be the case that as a whole, Egypt represented a mythic awareness, according to Gebser, seems to be that there's some teachings that they had, perhaps the priests had it, that went beyond the mythic, and that then infused itself into some of the Greek mythologies and Greek rational thought and mathematics. So I just mentioned that in passing.
Yeah. I think you're dead on about that. I don't think Gebser mentions it here, but he does attribute Gnosticism to the sort of French troubadours and the emergence of the eye. But what's interesting is, Gnosticism and esotericism really originated in Egypt, and Pythagoras and all these Greek philosophers traveled to Egypt to sort of discern these mysteries of a kind of individuated mysticism. But Wendy, you were going to say something?
Well, I just thought it was interesting when we were talking about Christ walking on water, and the word walk, implies that there was some sort of support underneath him, that he didn't fly out of the ocean depths and fly above into the air. He walked, and he needed the support of the mysteries of the ocean in order for him to progress forward.
Like instead of transcending it, he's actually in a way a culmination of it.
Or using
Incorporating
Not the right way of saying it, but I really like that idea. I like that's very that's a great point, Wendy.
I didn't hear anything that Wendy said. Would you all mind repeating it?
What I said, Greg, was that I found it interesting that he used the
Can you hear me?
Christ walked on water.
Can you not hear Wendy, Greg?
I could not hear Wendy. I didn't hear a word she said.
She was saying that it's interesting that it was walking, that Christ is walking on the water. So it's not like he's floating above the water or flying above the water. He's supported in a way by the water. He's on top of it, not over it, which is a really interesting distinction.
It is.
Hey, I'm just going to interrupt for one moment because we've had a couple of questions come in, and it's people wanting to connect. So I want to just address them. This is Amanda, and there was one other. And there's a link on the event page, so you just click that link, and it should open up this window where you can join the call. So just wanted to put that in there because they don't seem to see our chats here.
And the link is below where the video is playing. I got confused by that last week. It kept me
exactly.
Great.
But if I might make a point or ask a question, I think it's interesting that Gebser is always finding these sort of proto-structures or seeds of the mental in these what we would maybe consider to be more mythical types of structures or manifestations. And for me, that's part of the difficulty, and sort of that's kind of what's being reformatted in terms of my understanding, is because the kind of easy way of understanding it, I think, or the way that I perhaps came to it, was more in the sense of like stages of one structure arising and another structure arising. And of course that's very simplistic, and it was never meant to, even in the maps, it's not really meant to be understood that simplistically. But for example, in this question of Christianity, he's talking about it as a way of elucidating the mental structure, and as a way of elucidating, I think, how like the duality that the mental structure sort of brings forth, like first emerges, and so in Christianity you have this purification, right? This distillation or this isolation of the elements of the soul and God, or of heaven and hell. Or of life and afterlife, and so they have to become like radically separated, and then they have to become unified again, and then that becomes the work of redemption or salvation, or of this Trinity structure that Gebser goes into great kind of detail about. He also goes into detail about the distinction between polarities, which he describes in terms of like a unity, a complementarity, and then dualities, which are more a strict division, and how rationality, or the ratio, becomes like one of the means, or the primary means, that is, of creating those divisions, that kind of directedness, that one-sidedness. He goes quite a bit into the idea of mental thought as being directed, and then direction, recta direct is the right side, so it becomes a favoring of one side, a favoring of the wakeful aspect or the consciousness aspect. And I guess the question that I have, or what I'm grappling with in the text, is to really see like how how elements of one structure kind of lead to or become incorporated in, and then kind of like find their expression, like find their kind of final expression in the structure that emerges out of it, right? Because then we get to the mental, and then we get to this sort of efficient mental, and then the deficient mental, and so it's like these structures of duality, or these structures of two-ness or three-ness, the shapes that he gives, the two-dimensional circle to the three-dimensional pyramid, to where he's going with the integral, four-dimensional square. How they kind of like just change context and change expression, until they sort of, I guess, fall away or become absorbed into something new. But I'm finding it really interesting kind of to trace those progressions. And how do you guys?
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
This is Ed. Can I say something to that?
Yes, please.
I think Wendy brought up an important point about Jesus walking on the water. And I like to think of it, he was walking on the water and he didn't even get his feet wet. He's using it as a support, but it's kind of like concrete beneath his feet. He is actually separated off from that unconsciousness. And it's this aspect that I think that gets emphasized as we move from the purely mental into a rational state of consciousness. Earlier when we were talking about creeds and descending into hell or wherever, in German the Apostles' Creed says that he descended into the domain of the dead, not into hell. It's just into that domain, but he was untouched by that. Again, there's an acknowledgement that it's there, but a complete separation from it. And this is the difference in my mind between the mythical and the mental, where these polarities, we all know, for example, that death is a part of life. But I was brought up a Methodist in the United States, and when we said the Apostles' Creed, that phrase, he descended into hell, was not even included. It had already been edited out because we had completely separated from that. And when I went back for my father's funeral a few years ago, I realized that, at least in that community where I had grown up, death is anything but a part of life. It is completely separated from it. It is completely isolated from it. It has been excluded in many regards, but there is this complete antithesis between life and death. And to me, that is a perfect example of how we have come to separate things that were once together, and where in the rational we tend to absolutize them. We make them so exclusive that the other doesn't count anymore. That's all I wanted to interject there, Ben.
Thank you. That just brought to mind just even the contemporary interest in artificial intelligence, right? In Ray Kurzweil, a very sort of mental, rational attempt to escape death and to get just we when we deal with death, we deal with the body and sterilizing the body and keeping it away and pumping it with chemicals that kind of keep it sort of so it doesn't rot too badly, as if that makes
which, if I may interject here, in Germany is forbidden by law.
Oh, is it? Interesting.
Oh yes, you must go in naturally, and you must degenerate, if you will, because grave plots are only leased; they're never bought.
Wow. Very interesting.
They're reused every 25 years if you don't renew the lease, and you can only renew the lease once.
Wow.
Interesting.
That's fascinating. Has that always been the case, or is that a newer thing?
It's been the case as far as I know. It could be that it was different before, but we had this recently because of my own family. My wife's grandparents' graves were given free to be reused now because they did not renew the lease. After 50 years, we don't need to go there anymore.
What happens to the bodies, though? I mean,
they are completely decomposed.
completely decomposed.
Yes,
So,
because you're not allowed to embalm. You're not.
Gotcha.
However you die is how you get put into your casket. And the Germans, in their green fetish, that you must be everything that's in there must be biodegradable in all senses of the word. The only thing that's left over are the handles. But there are also institutes that create caskets where the handles would.
Wow. That's an interesting relationship with death as well. It sounds very different from.
It's so different from what I grew up with.
Yeah.
So different.
And that
But
might mark it.
I find it comforting. To be perfectly honest. It's a very natural thing.
Yeah, it's reconnective
Yes.
rather than trying
When
to remove
a person
the corpse
dies,
from. Yeah.
Exactly. When a person dies, they're not immediately removed from the house. My mother-in-law, not my mother-in-law, my daughter's mother-in-law died right before their wedding about a year and a half ago, and when she died, she remained here in the house for at least 24 hours before she left.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the theory behind that?
Huh?
What is the theory behind that?
Well, it's just that, we all want to take our leave of the departed. And we don't have somebody that's rushing in and saying, okay, well, I'll pack up the package and take it out of here.
I see.
Yeah.
Wasn't that, didn't that used to be a tradition in, like, the Victorian era? And that's why we call it the living room. Because the living one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a time when it was also part of the, let's say, the Anglo culture. I'm sure it's different in many, many places. I just found this German approach to it so direct.
Yeah.
As the Germans are often, and as Gebser often thinks. Very directly.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very, very fascinating, just in terms of this discussion in the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
I think you mentioned a point earlier about, like, hovering over the ocean and that kind of, like, space between, he's not getting his feet wet. It's so interesting about that. It just made me think of all of these kind of mythical stories that were probably we've heard this, a lot of deities and stories of supernatural powers and the kind of city kind of ability to kind of not be conquered by death, to be able to regenerate or to cure themselves or to fly or to walk on water. These are very, like, common supernatural attributes to people who learn magic or some kind of ability to manipulate the physical world. That is all very much tied to, especially esoteric schools of practice, where these kind of powers could open up for the initiate. Especially, let's say, I'm thinking of a myth that Eric Davis uses in his book Technosis. He's describing an old Gnostic myth of Hermes creating this city that sounds like a modern technological city with, like, a panopticon, and he could float around, and the city has all these gears and things that can move up and down, and all these magical abilities of teleportation and connection at a distance. In some ways, it's interesting that kind of thinking is intriguing to the mental. Not only in the story of Jesus standing on water, but also in the interest in Plato and Pythagoras to learn these mystery schools, not only for the secrets of, enlightenment or realization, but also these kinds of powers. And I think Gebser makes a connection between the mental consciousness and the magical consciousness, mental and magic and make and mechanics, and this kind of ability to retrieve a superiority or a power over the world through technology rather than magic. But there's a kind of link between the two that I think finds itself just throughout the entire history of the scientific revolution and the emergence of the mental, and especially in the mental rational, especially today with the internet and cell phones and the kind of almost magical qualities that we take for granted. So just interesting connection there.
The emergence of chemistry out of alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah. It's another one. That's
another one.
Trying
but,
to
it does make the relationship.
Stone.
Go ahead. Gebser does make that relationship between the magic, the mental and the magic more than once, and it was Arthur C. Clarke that said that any advanced technology appears to the normal individual as magic.
Yeah, it's indistinguishable, yeah.
It's indistinguishable from magic.
I think another very interesting point in the mental structure section is when he talks about drama and tragedy. Of course, tragedy in drama, in Greek drama, has to do with the characters in the end dying. On page 81, I really love the way he talks about magic root and mythical polarity, but he makes a statement in the penultimate paragraph. He says, true theater, like all genuine representational forms of man, is a cross-section of at least three structures, and like every other expressive form, it becomes spurious and consequently inhuman whenever one of the structures is over-prominent. So that's making a very, I think he's making an integral case there, that you don't, because the mental, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Because the mental comes from the mythic, and the mythic comes from the magic, or at least that's the progression, though I know he doesn't like the word progression, the developmental stages, or the mutation or metamorphosis, that you don't just leave one behind, that once you are at an integral stage, you want to incorporate all of them. He's saying that in our arts, in our expressive forms, you have all these elements. And that resonated with me so powerfully, because I see that, for example, in the art form that I have studied very, very deeply, jazz. I can see the magical, or hear the magical, feel it, the mythic, the mental, and so on. So I thought that was very interesting for him to put in at this stage of the book.
That's great. Thanks, Greg. That really it really struck me too when I was reading that. I don't really have experience in kind of the performative arts, but to make that statement, it stuck out for me too. How he had an integral statement on drama. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, and I just want to make this passing quick point that talking about death and the underworld and such, what's called the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a better translation of that is actually the Book of Coming Forth by Day.
Wow.
So, yeah, really. Really. So it was a transitional text that dealt with transitioning from the physical to the afterlife, but literally coming forth by day. So that just shows again I think some of the roots of what became Western.
Yeah, we don't like to have to deal with too much at one time, I think in our mental approach to things, it's nice to separate and put everything in this little box.
Well, but that's the analytical. That's that left hemisphere. We have to. I remember. I'm sure you all are familiar with The Passion of the Western Mind. Tarnas.
Yes.
That book was that book was revelatory for me, because by the time he got to the end and the reintegration to the origin, the feminine, I had a catharsis at the end of that book. And so it's necessary if we're going to separate from nature to come into our own consciousness. It's necessary, but at the same time, there's a lot of deficiencies there. So that's why we want to.
We don't always take the good things with us when we move.
Well, that's a great point right there. I think that's sort of, studying this stuff, and if you've read Thompson, if you've read some of these writers who aren't as kind of linear in their progression of the evolution of consciousness, there's a intrinsic messiness to this,
Oh yeah.
And if you read some of the guys who really love, the sort of mythic consciousness interest in the 1960s and 70s, and the resurgence of the archaic revival and that kind of stuff. Just, sacred geometry is a kind of a resurged interest today, and a lot of these people are saying, like, these ancient cultures and civilizations had advanced form of knowledge that we don't have anymore. And in some ways, they're playing up that as a superior, some of them, and others are not. They're just saying that knowledge is broken off. Ways of being in the world have broken off from us in the mental structure. And if you're reading the mental structure, it kind of makes sense. It seems, I don't know if there's any other way it could have happened, but it is like a rupture. It is breaking out of Zeus's head. There are things that are lost, and because of that, we gain this sense of self and awakened consciousness. But there's this whole other dimension of consciousness that we've lost, not perhaps forever, but certainly in terms of our own awareness of that it is a part of us, and that's why it haunts us. So there's a kind of just interdependence in this whole timeline, right, where it's actually all woven together. And Marco, you're mentioning that there's a kind of messiness to it, and it's hard to kind of hold it together because he's bringing the myth and he's bringing these other things that describe the mental. To me, like the image when you were describing that, Marco, was this concept of interdependence, right, or interbeing, where the structures of consciousness are more of like this kind of web that can only be really understood from a kind of integral or perspectival way, where there's this intensities of relationships that are kind of going back and forth and flowing into each other as they kind of unfold in time or intensify in time. But it's really hard to kind of go, all right, I'm just going to like chop it right here and say this is this structure. Because if you do that, you're actually kind of cutting this web of interconnectivity. You're breaking out, you're kind of destroying the insights, which to some degree is necessary, because he says, we're gonna go with this, we're gonna create these distinctions, and I think he even mentions it in this chapter, I'm contriving these delineations out of necessity, just because we are, our predominant structure is the mental, so we kind of need to do that because that's where we are right now. But we can even see that in a kind of ecological sense, that that's our center of gravity right now, but it's not all who we are. But yeah,
I think it's interesting how these structures tend to emphasize different body parts. So where the page that Greg was on, page 81, the discussion about theater, he talks about the importance of the ear, or the mythical structure, and how even the shape of the theater is like a conch shell. It's like an ear, and so that there's an intimacy when you hear something. It's like it gets in. I have headphones on, so right now all of your voices are very intimate to me. It's like you're inside of my my being. You're inside my body in some way, which if I was reading a text that you had written on a screen, you wouldn't be. It would still be kind of spatialized. It would be in front of me. I would be kind of confronting it face to face. And so there's, in a certain way, like the way that these different capacities, these different, organs of awareness emerge, it's like they have to kind of take on this exaggerated expression. They sort of, as they first arise, whether it's the hearing or the seeing, and perhaps other, senses that we, are not really that attentive to, but they're all there, and we could practice any of them. I mean, we could practice hearing. We could practice really listening, and with both. And by the way, with both ears, right? There's a post on the forum. I think it's the Johnny Davis posted about the way that, referencing these same pages, the way that you can have a left ear, a right ear, and then maybe a third ear, like corresponding to like a third eye. And so, it's interesting to begin to notice where you tend to favor. You tend to favor one side, you tend to favor one organ, you tend to favor one mode, and then realize that really shapes your experience. And if you begin to sort of disidentify with the favoring of one particular organ, one particular structure, you can bring them all into more of an orchestration, more of a wholeness. And I think that's what he's starting. What the integral is about. It's about integrating those, and that's, I guess, obvious to say. But when you get into all the interconnections between art forms and biological organs and our ideas, it becomes really kind of. I sort of become. I think you can start to integrate it at deeper ways, for lack of a better way of putting it.
No, I understand. Michael, I understand what you're saying, for the simple reason that there are very many things that are easy to say, but extremely hard to do. And for me, that's always an indication I think I'm on the right track. Michael Purdy, who was long involved in the Gebser Society, his complete focus for the last few years has been on listening. How do we listen? How do we actually hear what other people are saying, or whether it be in reading or whatnot? But what we consider in foreign language learning as passive capabilities are actually very, very active. Yeah. We have to learn how to listen. We have to develop our capacities to listen to what others are saying. We see that in American politics. Nobody's talking to anyone. Everybody's talking at everyone else, because there's no reception of what's coming. And this bringing it in and bringing it back out, the incorporating, the internalization, and then the expression of bringing it forth again where you can see it, are extreme. I believe extremely important aspects of what we're doing. I think you're onto something there, because it does matter one way or the other.
Mm. I got this line that keeps coming back to me that ties together, I think, a lot of what we've been talking about, and it's on 86. It starts with the paragraph, "Despite this fact," I'm not going to read the whole thing, but what he's talking about is, in the mental realm, we can never speak of something, but only determine something or conceive of it. And this links up to me with this idea of virtual reality, which Jeremy, you didn't say it directly, but we're talking about the way that technology is sort of mediating our experience of reality and the ways that affects our consciousness. And I have this sense of, the abstract mental self, this fiction, this legal fiction. We're talking about, how long your grave lasts, right? Yeah. How long that name lasts. The abstract pointer to this entity that doesn't actually exist, in the now, not in the great now, but in that now. And then this idea of, well, what is it to? Because what it's pointing at to me is, if we can speak something, right? And if we can speak something, which I think which I think he's talking about, it's not just the listening, it's not the sort of mythic speaking, and it's not the looking, it's the full being participation as the world. And that word, that sense of participation, which is relational, which is give and take, which is everything kind of at once going on, I think is also what he's talking about. And this is the first time that this has started to click for me, what the difference is between what the efficient modes are and the deficient modes, and the similarities. A lot of the things that we're talking about as being sort of prefiguring integral in these efficient modes, but it's about the difference between your participation as the world, your full participation as the world, whatever that world looks like around you, and you're turning on that world and trying to control it, or to determine it, or to dominate it in some way. And he has this other quote, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it, that has also been kind of ringing around in my head a little bit, where he says, like, he's talking about the sort of abstract container that one lives in if you're not speaking of anything, but you can only conceive of things. And he says that I want to find this. Wait a minute. Reason reversing itself metabolistically, and I don't know what he means by that, to an exaggerated rationalism, becomes a kind of inferior plaything of the psyche, neither noticing nor even suspecting the connection. although the convinced rationalist will be unwilling to admit it, there is, after all, the rational distorted image of the speculatio anime, the speculatio rationis, a kind of shadow boxing. This is what I've been thinking of. A kind of shadow boxing before a mirror whose reflection occurs against the blind surface. This negative link to the psyche, usurping the place of the genuine mental relation, destroys the very thing achieved by the authentic relation, the ability to gain insight into the psyche. And so I think what he's pointing at with this sense of a rational world is that our identifications have become attached so much to that legal fiction of ourselves, or that reality that our name is, that we only exist inside that that virtual reality bubble. Not necessarily technologically speaking, but that hub of ideas that connects you from actually touching the world, from actually being a part of and acting as the world. And I know there's something about that for me is leading into this larger question of that came up before, and now I'm totally blank. I think that was probably enough for now, obviously. I also want to note, like, how interesting it is, the sort of build-up that this conversation has had, where over the last, I think, 15 minutes, we've all been so excited by everything that we've been saying. It's awesome to be sitting here with all of you in that. I really enjoy that. And I enjoy, because it's a kind of touching. Like, I enjoy receiving all of you, and I enjoy obviously, what I'm saying right now would not be happening if you were all not here in this conversation, which is really awesome.
Yeah, with the tip of the hat to Greg, we all get jazzed.
Well, there is a section tacked on to the end of the chapter, and it comes after the mental, and it's the beginning of the integral, before he gets into the next. That's as far as I've read, by the way. I haven't actually gotten to the next chapter, but I will before our next hangout. And we're going to begin to talk about time, right? One of the things that Jeremy and I were just starting to geek out on before everybody else got on the line was there's a line where he's talking about Jesus as the man who creates his own space, something like that. Those may not be the exact words or the exact translation. And so that the Christ figure prefigures this perspective and prefigures our ability to create these lattices or these frameworks or these reality bubbles or these structures, these mental structures that we live inside and that become our mode of interface with all of reality, all of being, right? Thinking and being become the same thing. And so who is the human or the being that creates his own time? Would that correspond to the next, this next integral world, this integral aperspectivity? And what does it mean to create our own time? Because it seems to me that, the difficulty I have, the real difficulty I'm having right now is with time, like time management, like just, being present, dealing with time. Being busy, anxiety about time, not having enough, all that. It's just so. In some way, it's so banal. Everybody is in that state. It seems. It's just a cliche, practically. That we don't have enough time. That we're all in a rush. And my Twitter handle is Mad Rush. Partly alluding to that. And it's really like I've realized that's really the koan that's being presented, like the intensification, like that is inherent to the intensification is the feeling like there's too much happening all at once, and somehow you have to handle it. Somehow you're apart from it in some way. You have to handle it. You have to manage it. You kind of spatialize it. You have to organize it. And I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. It's like this is like the living inquiry for me right now. Even sitting with you guys here, because we have to schedule this. It's coming in the midst of a whole flow and sequence and constellation of other activities, and so it's very real, and it's something that's felt. I feel it in my body.
Yep.
It's quite the koan, I think.
No, I agree, Margo. It is. To me, the thing that caught me the first time and the 100th time I read Gebser was, what is the difference between timeless and time-free? That's the one I'm working on. What does that mean, to be time-free, or to be free of time, to be achronos, so to speak? Because that's what I hear you're saying. Because we're all wrapped up in every day, and you never, ever, ever have the time to do anything, not only that you want to do, but that you need to do. So we just kind of shove things in where we can and take care of it. But what is that actually, that this time, this freedom of time? That's where I see in Gebser the real key, because he tries to describe it, but I haven't quite got a hold of it yet in any way.
Can I kind of make an abstract comment on that?
Please do.
I hope so.
There's a line in Pippin, the musical, that says, if you're never tied to anything, you can never be free.
Okay.
So I would think free time would be that you have an awareness of it, and the awareness of your boundedness to it, and then your choice to do what needs to be done or that you want to do. Whereas timeless, there wasn't an awareness of time. Time didn't exist. It was timeless. Whereas time-free means you have an awareness that it's there, but you are making a conscious decision to free yourself from those bounds.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
That's a good point. Thank you.
That sparks the sense of, like, one of the things I've been picking up in this reading is the sense that if time is not an abstraction, but processes still happen. You're not measuring time by, right? Even if we look at our rational notion of time, it's still bound at first by, like, these mechanical processes that are telling us what 24 hours is in a watch or on a sophisticated clock. Even now, we don't have an abstract time. We look at how quickly these little crystals vibrate, and when they vibrate 900,500 times, something like that, then we have a second, right? So it's time is actually very much bound to these processes. What I'm thinking, Wendy, with what you're saying is that in devoting, so throwing out the mystical part of the equation, which I think is actually a legitimate one, which you've also talked about, because rational man is so cut off from these sort of, what look like powers to us when you are able to enter the dream flow, when you're able to enter these different streams of being. But the sense of filling up my life with a conscious directionality, not in terms of getting somewhere, but in terms of giving myself to the processes that are around me. So, like, I didn't finish this reading either this week, but I'm not measuring that on, oh, this is the time that we're talking about it, so I'm, like, late by it. It's the time that it is, it's the time that's happening given everything that's going on in my life. My daughter today had surgery to have a tooth pulled out of her mouth, and she wouldn't let them take the thing off afterwards. So we were in the hospital for 3 extra hours. I'm sitting there and balancing that tension of, like, I just don't want to be sitting in the fucking hospital for 3 hours where my daughter reads this book, right, and refuses to be seen by the nurses. And in a sense, that's my time that day. Like, that's the time that happened today. And obviously I'm going to stay there with my daughter, and I'm going to give that to her. So I don't, there isn't a package, there isn't anything that comes neatly for me in that, but I am grateful for your pointing that out, Wendy, because there's something that's very relevant about that we just don't handle time that way. We think of it as, like, I have X amount of time, so I'm going to do X amount of things, rather than saying I'm going to do this one thing. This is the thing I'm going to do because it's the most important thing. And that's then the next thing is going to happen too. And instead of trying to make all of this stuff happen, instead of trying to force my own will into time, instead of trying to force my own will out on the world, then I'm participating in what is actually genuinely in front of me and what I'm touching. not what I'm seeing and hoping for and thinking of myself as and trying to turn myself into, and all of these things that make us so fucking anxious about not having enough time to do those things.
No, I wonder.
Thank you for that. I needed that.
I wonder if there's a connection with this integral concretion, right? This time concretion that Gebser keeps talking about. And we're all like, how do you concretize time? How do you make time anything other than what we're describing? Or like, all right, I have so much stuff to do, or I don't want to be here in this time right now because this time is not very enjoyable. That about, and we're all like, how do you concretize time? How do you make time anything? Okay, cool.
We have a new participant on the call. Karen has been trying to get on. I saw your posts, Karen. So just make sure if you have headphones on, so we don't get the echo, and then you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Wow, okay, cool. Everyone was talking at the same time.
Karen has been trying to get on. Your posts, Karen. So just make sure if you have headphones on, so we don't get the echo, and then you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
I think I unmuted myself, but I don't have headphones.
Everyone's talking at the same time. Karen has been trying to get on. Okay, so find the other. In another window you have the video playing, and it's on a 30-second delay. So if you close the other window, then but keep this one open where you're connected with us, then you'll be able to talk, and we won't hear the echo. And while you do that, I just wanted to quickly. I couldn't resist this to Andrew, because I have 2 daughters, and they really want my time. They want me to spend time with them. They want me to make time for their timelessness. And there's something like that we have to actually make the time. You have to choose it. You have to make it. You have to, in some way, you have to sector it out. You have to say, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z so that I could be here with you and read the story to you, or deal with be with you in your own processes, like you're saying, be present with you, and that is so important. And there's something like the making of it is interesting too, like the idea that we can make time. What does that mean? Exactly. Like that sort of magic.
But it doesn't mean that
exactly magically make time.
He didn't make space by like physically making the space around him, right?
Yeah.
He created this and we also basically we're creating these bubbles, like these mental bubbles. That Jesus was filled with something very different than mine happens to be, but so it's not like we're making. I think that's the thing. It's like we're not making time. Like we think about that like, oh, I'm making more time for what? For everything that I want to do, which is an abstraction. But your daughters aren't an abstraction. My daughter's not an abstraction. Your daughters aren't abstractions, and they want you there. And so in giving, like I feel like there's it's very hard. This is my first and only post so far in the forum. It's very hard to disidentify our ways of thinking that are so natural and so ingrained in us, that are all completely embedded within this, ratiocentric way of dealing with our lives. I think I have to go. My wife is calling, and this is it.
Thank you for joining us, Andrew. That's great. Speaking of timing.
I just want to say something. I got lost for about 5 minutes, so I'm not sure. I just came in medias res, but I think that what we're talking about, one way of looking at time, I'm not sure if it's time free or time, I think it's time free, is the element of play. When you're in the midst of play, and that's related to art, that's related to lovemaking, there's something about a freedom from time that's in that. And I think that's one of the reasons that arts are so important, because when you are in the midst of a dramatic moment or immersed in music, or you're looking at a piece of art and you're just totally in there, there's something about the suspension of time that goes on in that moment or in those moments. And that's why, one of the reasons why, I know everyone here knows it, meditation is so important, where we take the time to be silent and just rest from all of the movements. Now, your mental activities, that's another issue. But you're taking the time to, and I think that's one of the reasons why in sleep, it's something I did some years ago and I haven't practiced it, but there's something about lucid dreaming, being conscious while you're dreaming. There's something I think just conceptually, mental, is very powerful about that, for you to actually be aware that you're dreaming. And I don't know what pragmatic, real life, effect that will have on someone, but it seems to me that, if you can be aware while you're dreaming, that says something about consciousness.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. We had Aaron Cheek on last week, and he's doing Gebser's translation right now. He's working on some older works, but there's an interesting kind of description that Gebser uses for the integral and the diaphanous as a kind of lucid, clear, seeing through everything, seeing through dream time, and seeing through even wakeful consciousness. So it almost sounds like lucid dreaming, and the way that Tibetan Buddhists conceive of our world is almost like a dream. Or literally like quite a dream, in which, if we can do that during sleep, if you can wake up during sleep, it can not only prepare you for, the afterlife, dying and going through death, but through life, and to kind of wake up to the lucidity of life and what life actually is. So there's an interesting connection you bring to that, and I kind of wonder, describing the integral, perhaps in the most intensified form, perhaps in the most experiential dimension, it is something like you're saying, where it's either a kind of creative intensification of consciousness, where you feel free to play with time, where you don't feel constrained by time, but you're still in it because you can play with it. You have to be in it to kind of play with and move things and play music, and just because there is there's a progression, there's a not really linearity, but there's a movement through time. But you're playfully using that to bring all these different elements together, to slow down time, to speed it up, to create a sense of a moment in a movie or a song or a poem where time slows down or doesn't seem to pass. Like, there's so much play with time and creativity. And then also in, as you mentioned, meditation as well. There's a play of time, there's a kind of lucidity and clarity that's just so beautiful, and they lend themselves to each other, like the creative and this contemplative. It's so interesting, and just to imagine that, it's almost unfathomable. Like, we're so in the mental that it's like how it seems like such an altered state, meditation. But I guess that's the point of meditation, right? To kind of eventually realize something about your consciousness, to intensify consciousness. To discover origin, to discover, the achronon, just already kind of present through everything. So when I first read Gebser, I just thought, the origin seems to be about this kind of contemplative, spiritual awakening or realization in us at some point, quote unquote.
And one, can you hear me?
Yes.
A few conversations ago, there was some talk, I can't remember exactly what, but I think that one of the connections here is that I think Ed was saying, when we're with art or lovemaking, when we're doing something creative, we're experiencing a different sense of time, and we're kind of in what some people call flow, and you're in a sort of like out of time, like there's a sense of infinite time. One moment could stretch out and feel, oh geez, it's time to have my washing machine fixed. Oh man, I finally get on and want to say something. But I think that creativity connects with that sense of origin. I mean, the origin out of which everything comes, out of which life is created. And wow, if we could live in that creative flow, like in a lucid kind of way, I think, to me, that's what living in the integral, that's a large part of what it's about, is that creative sense of flow.
I totally agree. One thing I heard the last Tuesday's call, but I wasn't able to participate, and I want to get on so bad because one of the things that I wanted to share is that, speaking somatically for a second.
Sorry, I was actually speaking online.
Yeah, I think you all were. Can you hear me, folks?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I remember there was a mention of, of course, being aware in your head and in your heart, but there's also the gut. And for me, and this is like something that my father would tell me, that he always listens to his heart, his head, and his gut. And I think there's something about having being in tune on all of those levels that's really important, so that there's something there that allows you to tap into a fullness of one's body and self or being. And I know some of these words have a lot of philosophical implications, but that allows one to, when you're interacting with others, when you're in situations, that if you can literally be in tune on all of those levels, there's something about the way you can achieve that kind of flow.
Yeah.
Can I just, Karen mentioned something really interesting. Later on in the book, on page 313, there's a chapter called The Nature of Creativity. And it's just the first paragraph is basically kind of tying into what we're saying here. And he says, in creativity, origin is present. Creativity is not bound to space and time, and in its truest effect can be found in mutation, the course of which is not continuous in time, but rather spontaneous, acausal and discontinuous. Creativity is a visibly emerging impulse of origin, which is, in turn, timeless, or more accurately, before and above time and timelessness. And creativity is something that happens to us, that fully affects or fulfills itself in us. This seems to be saying what we're talking about right here.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
The creative mind is we are enacting origin. We're enacting this kind of achronon. But yeah, I love that. It's interesting too, because just right up at the end of this section that we were reading, he's building up the mental structure, and then he kind of gets on page 99, and he kind of says, none of these routes is passable. All paths lead only to where they have led away from. Either we run in a circle, I think he's mentioning kind of like mythical, right? Time is a flat circle, right? Inexorably confined and imprisoned, or we run to and from one opposite to the other in the belief that that in this compulsive back and forth we will find a synthesis. What is needed then is not a way or a path, but a leap. And again, like origin, this leap, this creative leap. Is the general insecurity of today an indication that we are on the mark or about to leap? The depths of the abyss are visible only when one leaps across, and surely we have seen enough of the abyss during recent decades. Oh, he had no idea. But it is no longer until we should jump to the other side. So it's interesting that we're talking about creativity and leaps, and this kind of discontinuity, which I think we're feeling is palpable, because we're feeling like, how the hell do we realize timelessness or time freedom?
Yeah.
Originality and origin have very connected, I think.
For example.
Right. Like when you're just copying something, you tend to take a schema, right, and then you imitate that schema, right? So it looks like something else because it shares it shares structural features or whatever. But there's something that I think, in some ways, like the concept of originality and the concept, it's kind of been deconstructed. But in other ways, I think that that's not completely valid, because there is a difference when something is original. When we say something is original, when we say something, it carries that sense of coming out of or leaping out of or being discontinuous with other things that you already know, that you've already discerned or conceived of. So it's, yeah, I mean, this idea of originality and creativity coming out of or being an expression of origin, I think is really, really interesting, because that gets into the sort of mysticism of, like, where does creativity come from? Where do ideas come from? Where does novelty come from? And how do I, as an artist, bring that forth, right? It's like I can't manipulate it exactly. Like I can do the work, right? I can do the practice. And Greg, we've talked a bit about this in terms of improvisation, or you've talked a bit about it in other venues. So you have to become capable of improvising, and that's learning all of the structures. That's learning all of the techniques and methods, and attuning your instrument, and learning how to play it. But then when originality and creativity actually happens, it's something that happens to you. You know, it's sort of like it makes itself happen through you, insofar as you give yourself to the process.
To and through you, yeah. Well, I used to play the saxophone, and when I took lessons with a gentleman named Cesar DeMoro on Staten Island in New York, and he was a really wonderful European classical saxophonist, oboist, and a great jazz performer also. And we went through scales, you know. We went through chords, you know, patterns and that type of thing. And he said to me one day, he said, Greg, we learn all this so you understand what you're doing theoretically and you can execute this. But when you're on the stage and you're playing with other people, you just throw that away and you play. You play. You know, but to do that, you've got to have your fundamentals, your basics down, upon which to interact with other people, and to do it at a high level. Because if they put in the same work, then you can. It's like that's what we're doing here. I mean, all of us here have been studying this stuff, you know, in various ways for a long time, so that when we get together, we're able to actually commune with one another and interact and improvise in that interaction in a way that's beneficial for us all. And we're listening. I mean, that listening, before I got cut off, someone mentioned that Gebser Society presentation that focused on, or at least at the end, when someone was talking about listening. And that struck me because, you know, in jazz, listening is paramount for you to really be able to communicate with other people and respond in kind, and you've got to really tune in and listen. Yeah, so all of this relates very well for me.
It's almost as if the integral structure, if we're talking about body parts that are associated parts, that's such a mental way to describe it, but you know, perhaps it's the whole nervous system. You know? Like all of the senses kind of coming online, hearing, seeing, feeling, and then the kind of subtler senses that almost feel through time, that make connections, that kind of bring our embodied presence as a human being in time, in life, kind of all online, all together. So yeah, just so interesting. We kind of took the mental and kind of launched into something more for this discussion, which is great. I love how it came together. But you know, it's interesting because I wanted to just share one more part on page 99, because of the way it contextualizes the mental as this. No, I'll just read it, comment on it for a second. But he says, now as the deep state of sleep is characteristic of the archaic structure, a sleep-like state for the magic, a dream-like state for the mythical, and wakefulness for the mental, and then he says, a mere conscious illumination of these states, which are, for the most part, only dimly conscious, does not achieve anything. And I love that because he's saying a mere conscious illumination, the mental, the wakeful. I think he's talking about the mental consciousness. He's describing our mental rational, you know, the scientific revolution, all of this stuff, intellectually playing with these ideas as a dimly lit conscious mind, you know, just barely even, you know, the mental solar consciousness is just this dim light in this abyss of, you know, if we're taking a metaphor of the stars, right? The sun is only bright because we're close to it, but it's engulfed by this abyss, so it's really just quite a dim twinkling. Only when they are integrated via a concretion can they become transparent in their entirety and present, or diaphanous, and are not, of course, merely illuminated by the mind. So it's just so interesting. He's saying it has to be so much more than even what I'm doing, reading here and writing here and describing these processes and mentally developing and understanding a conceptualization, which can be quite illuminating, but the illumination that you're experiencing in your head may not be the entirety of what he's talking about. You know, he's saying go further, or not even further in a terms of spatialization, but in the next paragraph, of course, he talks about intensification, not spatialization, but intensification. So it's just a really interesting place to kind of leave us at the end of this chapter, to kind of go, you know, here, after all this illumination, it's just a dim candle, you know, in this other greater consciousness. But yeah. Did anyone else want to chime in? I see Lauren. I don't know if you've chimed in this time, but you're welcome to. And anybody else who wants to? Oh, we can't hear you. I see.
Oh yeah.
I see.
Reading the chat.
And you know, this is Karen's first time on, just the first few minutes on, but everybody else has had a chance to introduce herself. So if you wanted to, you could say, you know, how you came to this and where you are, and anything else you wanted to share.
I think she's saying that it won't.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, we can't hear
Yes.
Lauren, but Karen we can hear.
Yeah.
You're-
Figured it out. Kinda. I guess I might have heard about this through like a magazine article associated with Ken Wilber, but and I took to it wherever I heard about it. I thought it made tons of sense, even though I didn't know a lot about it. But when I took a class with Eric Weiss in California. I live in Pittsburgh, and I read a lot of ever-present origin, but not the whole thing. And I was really loving it. And what really was interesting to me, and I was writing about it too, but when I was taking classes, I took a 7-week painting as spontaneous expression. So you came to this paper with I'm not going to paint a still life. I'm not going to, you don't have an idea in mind. And what was fascinating to me was, well, I'll just tell you first. We played with the paint. I mean, I played with the paint. My first painting was just playing with colors. And each time I might have had a tiny little feeling of what I was going to do. But when I looked back afterwards, well, when I was looking at one of them that I was going to give my daughter, I have a daughter too, I was going to give that to her to take back to school, but it wouldn't fit in the car, and I am so glad I have them all together, because when I was looking at that one, it was like a woman that was like a mountain. Her hair, she was like a mountain, and I won't describe them all, but I thought, oh my gosh, this is the goddess, this is the mythical structure of consciousness. Right there, and within the woman, there was a face within, like it was like the reflecting inner self that develops in the mythical. There was this primitive looking face, the breasts were the eyes, the womb was the mouth, and she only had one eye though, she didn't have the full perspective. And then I started looking, wow, look at that one that I did before it. It's all vibration. It's like the magical, like when there was no mouth, and the psychic and the vibration, and like, wow, look at the first one. It's this circle. It looks, there's a circle forming in the middle, and it looks like the birth canal, the beginning of the 1 point, sense of self and consciousness. And so they all fell into place, and the mental was, I could go on and describe and talk about these, but it was like I had painted these things in order out of this spontaneous place, and I wasn't even aware that I was doing this. But I think that's like another example of, because I was really fascinated with all this, and it's just coming out through a creative process, and here I am kind of like living it. I think that's what Jeremy, I think you said on page 99 about the concretization. I think the living of it is that concretization, where we're just in the flow, like I said before. And I thought that was just so cool to see what had happened when I was in the flow.
Awesome, Karen. That's really, yeah, I think that's exactly what he's talking about on page 99. He talks about that too, right? Like, the other structures, they have to be lived. They can't just be abstracted. You can't just mentally go, oh, this is the mythic, and it's, it represents this, and like let's look at the cave art images, and like think of like no, we have to experience it directly. It has to be, we have to feel that it's a part of us, that it constitutes us. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So does anybody else want to pop in with anything before we've gone about, what, 90 minutes now?
Yeah, we have. And one more thing to what Karen said. I think part of experiencing what we perceive or may wear as the integral structure is exactly what she said. We experience them. We actually bring them down into our own personal reality. And in some way, in our own personal reality, we feel and we intuit and we see and we grasp that we're doing things other than what we thought we were doing. And it's very, very hard because we as rational, mental rational, most of us are just rational human beings, we want to get a hold of it and hold on to it. And I don't think that's going to work if we try to hold on to it. We have to appreciate it when it's there. We have to go with it when it's there. We have to recognize it when it's there. And later, when we have the opportunity, like now, she can share this with us so that we can see it's in the living that we live and not in the talking about the living that we live.
Can I say one other thing?
Please do.
What?
I hope so.
Well, we're kind of ending. That I remember reading Freud's interpretation of dreams and just learning about how, or thinking about how you can just take a dream and keep on going with it. You know, you just keep going. I can look at these paintings and or look at them with other people and keep seeing more and more things. And I think that's there's something about being awake, but also realizing we are living in a dream, and there's something very, very creative about a dream. And you know, also when I was talking about these paintings, when I came home and had them all hanging around the house, my daughter was a little bit kind of like, she's 24 now. She's kind of like, well, she had a sense of, you're just making all this up, all this meaning. And I'm like, you know what? That's what we do as humans. You know, we just live that, and we make that up. This just part of that's maybe part of the mythical. I'm making a story that goes with it, or I'm making, doing the mental with it. But that's dreaming. We just can keep going back, and it's rich and it's alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. So,
Jeremy, we have multiple chat windows. We have a Q&A window, and we have a chat window, and then there's the page on the Google event page. But I'm just noticing that Amanda, New Era, and Donna have been posting comments or questions in this Q&A app window. And I don't know if...
maybe we should take a few minutes to go over them? That's all right.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch, but maybe the last couple, they're kind of comments. They're not all questions. But I don't know. Let me just pick one. Let's just pick one so that we can bring in the presence of somebody who wasn't able to get on the call, and then we could, I know we're trying not to go too long. Okay, so Amanda asked, when you are making time, are you in fact actually ignoring the concept altogether? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. I mean, in a certain way, you kind of almost have to use a certain... I'm going to select that question. Okay, here's my take on it quick. Making time. And this is sort of like me just as a life artist trying to figure it out, how to make art with time. We were talking about this earlier, Jeremy, is what if time was a medium for art making? I think a great example of that is David Bowie, who just passed and released his final album called Black Star just days before his death. So he made that album knowing that he was going to die. And it's like he timed it. He timed the release of it. And maybe he didn't do this completely rationally. You know, maybe this is just sort of what concretized, like, in his art-making expression. But in a way, he really used time itself as a medium in his art making. So it's not just the music, which is the art. It's also the whole performance of the music and the performance of releasing the music and the performance of the social phenomena that sort of constellated around the music. That is the art. And somebody else wrote an essay about Bowie. It was called Changes or something. I don't have the title right. But one of the things he pointed out in this essay, it was a guy named Chris, Kryzs. I'm probably spelling that wrong, but is that, you know, Bowie was always kind of getting us to see the transparency of time, you know, the impermanence, you know, of our identities, the impermanence of our expressions, because he was always changing his appearance, changing his style, collaborating with different artists, and then finally in this, you know, this final act or gesture, he turns time itself. It's almost like the culmination in some way of a form of art, you know, which maybe we could say is a kind of integral art because it's really working with or making with time. So that would be my take on that question, just to loop Amanda into the conversation as well.
That's great. There's a documentary called Time is Art.
Oh yeah, that's brand new. That just
yeah, it's an interesting take on this kind of this train of thought. Yeah, when you were talking about changes, I thought of David Bowie's song Changes. But yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there, Marco. The way Bowie creatively played with his life, it's like you look at his art and you look at all of his different personas and expressions, and it's almost like looking at that Picasso image, right? Like he's like shape-shifting right in front of you, and like decades are coming forth and then folding back in, and other decades are coming forth, and it's like he made his own death a kind of creative effulgence, you know. Just it was so beautiful the way it happened. It reminded me of those in a more subtle way, the sort of Japanese Zen Buddhist death poems, like where they would write this final expression of their realization through their death, and they would use their death even as a way to express that kind of realization. So for Bowie to do that was quite profound, and I don't even know if it was intentional, because from what I've been reading, you know, with health issues like he was having with cancer, fighting it, he wasn't sure whether or not he was going to survive or not. He was probably preparing not to, but he was apparently working on an album after Black Star. So I don't even know if he was again, this may have been this kind of creative brilliance that he wasn't even consciously aware of entirely doing, as far as timing is concerned, dying 3 days after Lazarus came out, you know. So yeah.
There's a philosopher, Paul Ricoeur, who talks about chronological time and narrative time. So, of course, chronological time, that's the clock. But narrative time is when you're in the midst of story, you're reading a novel, or you're in the midst of a piece of drama. There's something that's a different relationship of us to time in that setting too. So perhaps making time is adjusting more to or enacting more of a narrative kind of time than just chronological.
You know, making time is also an interesting, I know it's a very modern phrase. I don't know where the phrase originates from, but this reminds me of Mircea Eliade's writing about mythical time. And, you know, in you know, we have to remember the importance of ritual in entering a different form of time, and the kind of deliberate act of stepping into sacred time was differentiated even by these mythical structure-oriented people, where they had a sense of the mundane time and then the sacred creative time. So that's a kind of interesting distinction too, to make time, to literally enter a moment. Even today, by playing a song, you're making time. You're entering into a kind of altered ritualistic state where you experience time and meaning and significance differently. Or going into a movie theater, you experience time differently. So we kind of reenact these kind of sacred rituals through very technological or mundane means, but it's retrieved, I feel, in our time. So just an interesting thought, too.
Also, from what I remember of reading Eliade and talking about mythical time, people, I forget what he calls the people, but they know that they are creating the world. It's a very important, that's not the word I want, but there's a lot of responsibility around it. So when they enter mythical time, they are recreating the world from origin, you know?
Yeah.
So that goes along with the creativity and coming out of origin, and you're in a different sense of time. You're in creative time. You're in, you know, like you said, not the mundane.
You know, there's an author, I can't remember his name, I think he's an anthropologist, something Turner, and
Victor Turner.
Victor Turner, there we go.
Yeah.
And he talks about this kind of time, moving into sacred time, and how Amber Case used him basically to argue that, you know, with modern technological culture, we've retrieved these kind of moving into sacred times in a ritualistic sense through cell phones and through technologies like this. Like right now, we're all connecting in this kind of moment, this 90-minute period, but we're not thinking about that 90 minutes. We're thinking about entering into this discussion around this book and the significance of the book. But the technology is enabling us to kind of do that. But the technology is not as important as the strange asynchronicities that we're experiencing. Different hours, different times of the day. Maybe we're at the other side of the world. We're coming together. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Even in the mental, like today, we're doing things that retrieve the mythical or magical, and we're kind of already doing a kind of time play. Perhaps because, you know, time is, as we've been seeing, there's a nonlinearity to this time eruption, this time concretion. So maybe in the mental, and maybe in its deficiencies, even in its secular aspects, it's retrieving and trying to concretize and bring back ritual time and mythical time and magical time and timelessness. It's a kind of literalized form, like digital time is just always now. It kind of forces you into this magical timelessness, but you don't fit. And we're trying to put all of our, our conceptualizations of time, where we have so many things to do and tasks and time allotting, into this thing, digital time, where we're always on and always now. And I mentioned this before, as Douglas Rushkoff talks about it as present shock, which is a very interesting kind of slamming together of this magical timelessness, and then also this, you know, quantification of infinite time, which doesn't work. It creates stress. It creates a kind of tension in us. So just kind of riffing on all this stuff now about making time. But yeah.
I think what Karen said is so essential. The awareness that you are in the process of actually creating something, creating your world, your reality. And I think that has to do with the concretation of time. I mean, it's like past, present, and future at the same time. I mean, that's my basic understanding of the concretation of time, or the concretion of time, as shown through that Picasso painting that he has earlier in the book. And for me, that's, yes, incorporating, say, the magic and mythic, and say we're, you know, in the mental, but it's also, if you have an orientation towards the future, if you're working towards something and you can envision something, use your imagination, then that's there too, and can become, you know, a reality. This kind of gets into quantum physics. I mean, there are these probabilities. There's no assurances. It's not definite, but these are probabilities, and you can bring them together and actually, in a sense, create your world. I know that gets a little mystical, and I don't want to sound like what's that series
Oh, did we lose Greg?
If
There you are. We lost you for a sec, Greg.
What'd you say?
We lost your connection for a second. Can you hear us? Or hopefully Greg will pop back in.
He was about to give a caveat to the effect that I think he was going to refer to The Secret, the movie
In the future,
Secret.
into being that's when you.
We're experiencing a strange time asynchronicity right now.
Well, I'm going to just then bring in one other voice since we can't hear Greg. Donna Emsil Schill also left a question or a comment, I guess. I'll just read it. And then I think I probably should go because I have my babysitter coming and need to eat lunch before that. But I want to read Donna's comment. It says, Berger first theses, the dead surround the living are the core of the dead. In this core are the dimensions of time and space. What surrounds the core is, all caps, timelessness. Okay. That's something to contemplate and chew on, I think.
Quite a way to put it.
Yeah.
It's another way, just riffing on the digital, it's strange that considering if all this technology survives for another century or so, that our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and relatives will be watching or able to watch these videos of their great-great-grandparents and uncles and aunts and just distant relatives talking about stuff and wondering about the world and making Facebook status updates. It's an interesting take on the retrieval of this understanding that the dead are speaking and are present and in a kind of magical, mythical way, participating in life.
The dead surrounding the living.
Yeah.
And if we kind of live in the internet in the future, that's basically like what you do all day is you're online, that's where you work, that's where you travel.
Yeah.
You know, it's virtual reality. Then the dead are going to be all around us.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to be the ghosts of our children's future, to borrow a phrase from the movie Interstellar.
And it's another web that we're going to be enmeshing everybody in. It's temporal web of all this data, all this information. Just I have no idea. The future is unfathomable. But
maybe we should wrap it up. We're way past our.
Yeah.
I think we're just going. I have things to do, like I said.
Yeah, and just
I also want to think. I want to think about the people that actually want to watch this. We don't want to tax their attention too much, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and whoever's going to be listening in the future.
And then our next hangout is coming up on Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be on again 20 minutes before the hangout to help people with their technical issues getting on. So if you've had trouble getting on, Amanda, Lauren, whoever else was out there, I just read the question. Yeah, just come on 20 minutes early and we'll help you get on. Usually it's just some playing around with different configurations and logging out and in or whatever, and we can get people on. So that was wonderful. Thanks, Jeremy, for facilitating, and thanks everybody for.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next time.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.